Hi guys, welcome to Snakes and Adders Introducing Series. This is episode 40 and today we're going to be discussing this awesome species of skink, the Peter's banded skink, Scincopus fasciatus. This is a wonderfully interesting species from sub-Saharan Africa, tracking from Sudan in the east through to Mali in the west. There are a few other populations to the north, but these seem to be isolated little pockets of populations. So very hard to sort of explain how they got there, and they exist in Tunisia, Morocco, Algeria and Mauritania. So we can see the main populace is here from Sudan through to Mali as discussed, but then we've got these orange dots which is slightly harder to explain as they are north of the Sahara. This population here, this population here is another subspecies, which is Scincopus fasciatus melanocephalus, which, if our Latin is anything to go by, means black-headed, which this one certainly is not. Oh yeah, gorgeous, see? God, it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So discussion suggests that they're omnivores. We've had sporadic success with veg. We've not really tried flowers, so that might be a route to go down, but they're certainly insectivorous. They will accept bits and pieces of pinkies, and then they will also accept dog food and cat food, but these are high fat and generally would only be used short term to try and regain weight. Every effort should always be made to offer a wide and varied diet. All animals in captivity are wild caught, and therefore as much nutrition as possible is needed to ensure weight gain post-importation. Care must be taken not to treat for parasites immediately upon importation, owing to creating immunosuppression, which is because wormers such as panicure, whose active ingredient is fenbendazole, doesn't recognise the difference between good and bad bacteria, and it will just wipe out the gut flora, and that can mean a real suppression of immunostrength, and therefore their ability to fight off infection, disease and illness becomes very hampered. So it's more important that we help them to gain mass early on, to maybe then consider taking it off them later. Some people won't even bother, they'll just leave them as they are with their natural gut flora in place and hope that by using maybe electrolytes they can help to rebalance the gut flora and make sure that the good bacteria is winning. If there's concerns around body weight and body mass, treats such as wet salmon, cat food or wet dog foods can be used as temporary boosters to gain condition, particularly diets containing spirulina, which can help with shedding and skin condition. Dehydration is commonplace, particularly with fresh imports, so the use of electrolyte baths, such as a product on the UK market as ReptiBoost, may help to rehydrate your animals. Rehydration isn't simply just drinking water. Rehydration is the replacement of salts, electrolytes and amino acids lost through stress and importation, and the importation process can certainly be described as a stressor at the very least. It can take a while for these little chaps to come out of their shell upon arrival, and instinct will tell you to maybe fuss them, but don't. Leave them to it. Do not lose sight of the fact that this is an imported animal and therefore requires a little bit more in the way of kid gloves. Don't be mistaken, this is a robust skink. It's built like a tank, so there's usually plenty of weight on them. This is a relatively recently imported animal, gained a load of condition recently. We've been feeding it a nice wide varied diet, and you've got plenty of junk in your trunk, haven't you, mate? You have, yeah. Come on then. Absolutely ace. You can't get down my back. You can't get down my back. You can sit on my... Yeah, that's my beard. Where are you going? You can't disappear down there. We had this with the spiny tail monitor. Come on. I'm going to have to hold you if you won't behave, you know. God, you're beautiful, aren't you? Hey? Aren't you gorgeous? Once they're settled, the food will steadily disappear, so we're going to keep an eye out for fecal material, which is a sure sign that obviously it's passing through and we've got good bowel movements, etc. These animals are primarily nocturnal, owing to this being a natural requirement where they're from. It isn't exactly gentle living here. This is a pretty harsh environment. So, how would we go about keeping such a wonderful species as a Peter's banded skink? We need a loose and shifting substrate, and many of the care sheets that I've read recommend sand, loose and friable substrates that these animals will use as their security blanket. If startled, they will disappear down into the substrate and swim through it. This is how skinks are designed, with smooth, fish scale-like skin and tiny little legs, and once they're under the surface they fold their legs by their side and they can literally swim through the water. Got this lovely streamlined snout and this powerful body and powerful tail, and they will literally just swim. It's amazing to watch them disappear. It's so cool. Predominantly their moisture is going to be from their food, but as always, one of the 5 fundamental freedoms is that we give them access to fresh water should they want it. It doesn't need to be a big bowl, just something they can dip their snout in for a drink if they feel like it. Skin is shed like fish scales in bits and pieces, and it comes off in rolls, and you'll find just a roll of skin. Dampened hides are preferential to aid with this. Even though these are described as desert species, we would always try and offer some sort of localized damp hide to replicate them trying to find this sort of area in nature, and it just helps the skin to come off. We don't want there to be any problems with skin shedding. We can't use bone dry as a description of this species' natural habit, but we're going to cover that slightly later in the climate data, which you may find interesting. I know I certainly did, and I've gone a bit further with the use of visual aids for this video because it's interesting, and this is a new ground species where we're all learning at the same time. What a fantastic, exciting prospect that is. So, Peter's banded skinks can be sexed by studying the snout length, but this is anything but straightforward. Given only 2 successful breedings have occurred, not only have we not necessarily locked down sexing them, but also the required conditions to be able to replicate their natural annual cycle to induce breeding behaviours. So this species was first described by Peters in 1864 as Scincopus fasciatus. This puts it with the sandfish skink, whose Latin name is Scincus scincus. I can see the resemblance. There is a facial resemblance, and the body shape, albeit on a far grander scale, is very reminiscent of a sandfish indeed, although the eyes are far larger and the snout isn't quite as sharp and quite as specialised as the sandfish is. I mean, the sandfish is literally like an F1 car's nose. It's crazy. They were moved from Scincus to a genus called Cyclodus, then back to Scincus, and then into Scincopus. 2 subspecies are described, the nominate here, which is Scincopus fasciatus fasciatus, fasciatus being the Latin for banded. So we've covered this in other videos that we've done. So just basic Latin skills are useful here. Fasciatus means banded, vittatus means striped, maculatus means spotted. Yeah, so this is where we go with that. Such as the Burmese python bivittatus means 2 stripes. So this is where we go. Heterodon, het, 2, odon, teeth, double tooth. Yeah, so, or 2 types of teeth. Heterodon, hognose snake. I digress, but this is where maybe an understanding of science, the scientific names and the Latin names and the meanings that they've been given, literally it just translates to the English if you start to look at them, and it's an interesting subject to follow. The other subspecies is Scincopus fasciatus melanocephalus. Melanocephalus, so melano, black, cephalus, head, black-headed. This one obviously isn't melanocephalus, it is the nominate form, Scincopus fasciatus fasciatus. The recommended size vivarium for a single animal would be around a 36 by 15 by 15 inch vivarium, which in new money is 90 centimeters by roughly 40 by 40. For a single, that's for a single animal, whereas a group, say a male and 2 females, as long as you could sex them out, would be better off in a 48 by 18 by 18 vivarium, which is 120 by 45 by 45. So these are low and long tanks in the way that they're set out, and the reason for that is we have to run the gambit of some pretty serious temperatures, so we need quite a high basking temperature, and to that end we then need to be able to move away from that, and this is the thermoregulation we have to allow our animals to engage in captivity. UVB is recommended, but maybe more for vitality and the instinct to breed and reproduce than bare necessity. Where these animals are from, there is zero chance that they could be out on the desert surface during the heat of the day. They may stay out for the very first rays and the very last rays of the day, but primarily they're nocturnal and they have the specialised eyes for such. And even though their eyes on this video will appear jet black, they're incredibly dark brown, but what I can see is the black cat's eye running down the centre, so they do have that special night vision pupil which would help them be able to hunt as well. Pretty much everything's going to stop during the middle of the day as we work through Chad and Niger and Sudan. It's just too hot, they can't do it. The basking area, the surface temperatures underneath the light should be in the region of 60 to 70 degrees Celsius with an air temperature of around 45 degrees Celsius. Animals must be able to escape this. This is not a sustainable temperature and that they can live at permanently. They may go to warm up and then move away sharpish. And also during the heat of the day, if we're replicating nature, expect them to become sedentary and almost have a daily estivation where it's just too hot to cope with and I'm going to go to sleep underneath my substrate. And these animals more than likely will come to life at night. So this is all normal. Nighttime temperatures, the drop should be to between 22 and 24 degrees Celsius during normal conditions. There are periods, however, throughout the year where it would drop more. But we'll go through that with the climate data because we need to discuss where the animals are from and how maybe we could manipulate that. And this is where it gets interesting because this is the actual data of the countries of origin these animals occur from. So, my darling, I'm just going to pop you away. It's going to disappear into his sand and we're just going to have a look at this data now. Okay? Okay, so we've done a bit more in the way of this. We normally only did the printouts for the kids videos, but I thought it was pretty important and I think I'm going to start doing this more often. Let me know if this is something that you think that we should continue doing because it helps to actually set out the facts. So rather than it just being rumours or my opinion, I mean, a lot of it is opinion and a lot of it is conjecture and based on mine and Paul's experience, but also facts do have to play a part, and sometimes there's a juxtaposition between captivity and the wild, such as anacondas. We don't keep them soaking wet through in captivity because they blister, yet this is an animal that lives in marshes and bogs in the wild. So this is a juxtaposition, but this is what we've learned through experience. Now this is a new species, so we're all having to think on our feet and we're having to try and work out which way we go. So we can see that the primary population is sub-Saharan, running from Sudan, Chad, Niger and Mali. So what we decided to do was we visited the website we always quote, which is www.timeanddate.com. And there we found the climate data for each of these regions. So the 4 regions that were chosen were Khartoum in Sudan, Mongo in Chad, which is quite possibly the most awesome name ever, Zinda in Niger, and Sikasso in Mali. And what we've got is the blue is Khartoum, red is Mongo, green is Zinda, purple is Sikasso. And it's interesting because we have actually got a pretty visual double dip season, which is odd. Normally there's just a single hot season where we have 2 pretty defined hot seasons and 2 major cool-offs. That's odd. You know, when me and Paul were discussing this the other, it's like, where can you think of, like, when we've done other stuff like that's going to have that double dip? It's interesting, really interesting. Peaking in April, 41 degrees and 42 degrees in Khartoum and Mongo, whereas we seem to be peaking out at around 38, 39 for Zinda and Sikasso. Now bear in mind these are data stations, probably on airstrips, and this is ambient temperature readings. So surface temperatures would be incredibly in excess of this. And bear in mind that number 42 there, which is the peak number on the whole graph in Khartoum, that's the average daily temperature for a whole month. So we can safely assume that there will be certain days approaching ambient temperatures of nearly 50 degrees Celsius. That's insane. Insane. So let's pop that back. Next we've got the nighttime low. So a lot of times when we've been breeding like boas or pythons, it's normally the the nighttime manipulation that increases the willingness to breed. And we have got quite a considerable bit of fall off here, with the green line of Zinder dropping to 15 degrees Celsius at one point. Peak nighttime temperatures are 28 degrees in Mungo at night. Can you imagine trying to get any sleep there? But again, we've got this double dip, which is interesting because it's trying to make sense of how we replicate this double dip. What I'll do is I'll scan these and then I'll add them to the Facebook post that we make so that people can see the data for themselves. But incredibly interesting stuff. Finally, once we've looked at daytime high and nighttime low, or DTH and NTL, we're then going to look at rainfall. So rainfall helps us to infer humidity, just how moist the environment's going to be, all the rest of it. Now, Peter's banded skinks, on all of the care sheets that I've read out, desert lizards, want to be 20% humidity, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so at certain periods during the year, cool, I'll roll with that. I will roll with that. Sudan is a pretty dry place throughout the whole year. You know, what are they peaking at? 7.7 mil per month, which is in July, so that's the wet season. But as we track to the west, we've got Mungo, Zinder and Scincopus, who incrementally become wetter during their season. And we're looking at peak numbers of, in Scincopus, in Mali, of 231 mil per month. Now, Scincopus is in this range. It's not just a region that I've picked. I've made sure that each of these four are from within this orange bar, which is the known designated distribution of Scincopus fasciatus. So we have got some serious rain. Bear in mind, on the spiny-tailed monitor video we did the other day, Manchester in the UK, which is a grim, horrible place full of Mancunians, that rains about 36, 37 mil in a month. Is the wettest month, like January, which is just a horrible minging month. So to be able to get 231 mil in a month for a desert lizard. Now, bear in mind, we'll not just take that, we'll go to Mungo and Zinder. We're still peaking out at 162 for Zinder and 123 mil for Mungo. So even Mungo, the third wettest, is still 4 times wetter than Manchester during that period. Yes, certain regions will drop right off. Sudan was 24% humidity, but the rest of the places were tracking it 50, 60 and 80% humidity. So bear that in mind. Now, with all these lines, it can become confusing, so we distilled it down for you to make it a bit more simple, which is stuff that you can do yourself, guys. I keep talking about this, where you do your own independent research and work out, you know, how to be able to look at data and work it out. So we took the averages across the 4 regions for daytime high, and then we used the second line to track nighttime low. Now, this distilled down version shows a definitive double dip season, where we have got during December and January, daytime highs of 31 to 31.5 degrees Celsius, a nighttime low of 16.5 to 17 Celsius. So that's pretty cool, considering we're right in the middle of sub-Saharan Africa. If we then compare April, which has got a peak temperature of 40.25 Celsius during the day and 26.5 Celsius at night, we then get our secondary cool season, which isn't as deep or pronounced, in August, with lows of 32.5 during the day and 24 degrees at night. The secondary peak comes not quite as harsh, 37 degrees and 24 degrees at night. Interesting. A definitive a double dip season. But when we distill down the rainfall, we end up with a single peak. And that single peak occurs between August and September. So we track pretty much bone dry and then start to build steam through May, June, July. So May, 20 mil. June, 39 mil. So that's Manchester right there. and then it keeps going. 90 mil through July, 130 through August, 77 back down to in September, 24.4 in October, then November 1.35, and then we have our drought season. So if we overlay the two, which is what we need to do, this illustrates how we would be able to manipulate our seasons to hopefully try and induce breeding within Scincopus fasciatus. Whilst there is a earlier in the year peak, which is harsh, during the secondary cool down, there is also the spike of the wet season. So this is something that we would encourage you to try and replicate to see if this can act as the triggers required for the species. You may wonder, with all this information, why we've put them in an introducing series. Well, there's two things going on here. Scincopus fasciatus, once settled and feeding, are a wonderfully tame lizard. Absolutely beautiful personalities. They feed well, they gain mass well, and in actual fact they're probably a parallel to a Berber skink, which is an equally fantastic species. But then also we have this other section, which is, this is a new species, relatively new to the hobby. It's not new to science, first described in the 1800s, so it's been known for years, but we've only had access to it for maybe a decade, and at which point the race is on to try and work out how we breed them. What we know now is that we can't keep collecting from the wild indefinitely. Species that have since become protected, chili roses, imperial scorpions, Williams day geckos, electric day geckos, you've got a list, and we're the contributing factor to that. This can't continue ad nauseum. We do need to put some work into finding out. Skinks are notoriously difficult. Even Berber skinks, which have been kept for 25-30 years, there's still only a handful of people breeding them, and then usually it'll be the first season that they arrive that they breed. Getting repeated breedings is the difficult part, because then you're then trying to re-season them and re-manipulate them to get the triggers, and that isn't always easy. Don't panic about humidity. The nominate humidity in England, where we keep these animals, is 50-60% humidity, if not more, and on occasion may even hit 80% humidity. The heat within the tank will burn some of that off, but the likelihood that you're going to be able to get your tank down to the 15 and 20% humidities is incredibly low. So don't lose any sleep about it. It's still pretty dry, and for the most part your lizards will shed without issue, which is a good thing. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you enjoyed that bit more detail. This is something we'll probably look towards doing to try and help you guys out in fathoming out how we would go about setting out to breed or do something new. If I was looking at doing a species I've not bred before, this is the sort of file that I would create to be able to give me an idea of how we would work with it. And realistically, when we get down to it, it's common sense. What's not common sense is totally relying on a chat room on Facebook or a reptile forum. You know, whilst yes, it will give you some insight, people can be quite jealous, guarded about the information that they've acquired, because they want to be the first, or they want to be the one with the only supply. And we could pretend otherwise, but it would be pretending. There are people like that in this hobby, and not just with skinks, with all sorts of different species, scrub pythons, you name it. There's always these little partisan guys that are, you know, they like to be the head honcho, they don't want to share, which is a real shame. This is all public, in the public domain, where you can get it, you can search for it, find it, 2 minutes on Excel to create the graphs for you to be able to look at to infer how to keep them properly. Do your research, look up as much information as you can. This is a wonderful species, great opportunity to work with, but take seriously the responsibility that if we're going to import animals, we do need to crack how to get them to reproduce, and this is probably the best starting blocks for you to be able to do so. We'll see you again soon. All the best, guys. Cheers.